I unfortunately have not seen the 1992 cult classic Universal Soldier. Starring Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren, the movie tells the story of two Vietnam War-era soldiers who are cryogenically frozen and, 25 years later, become the subjects of a super soldier program, where their minds are wiped and parts of them are replaced with cybernetics. However, Van Damme gets a sense of deja vu that reawakens his memories, and he escapes the program, with Lundgren being sent to terminate him. And then there's a bunch of explosions, a bunch of gory executions, and thinly veiled commentary about big bad politicians and corporations not caring about the value of human life while raking in the monies. So basically, RoboCop meets Demolition Man. And it was one of the earlier projects of controversial popcorn flick writer-director-producer Roland Emmerich, who would go on to basically shape 90s sci-fi action films, for better and for worse. While initially blasted by critics, it made a killing at the box office, and has gotten a real appraisal in recent years, with modern critics praising it as good cheesy fun and a great time capsule of 90s action cliches. So of course, a franchise was bound to follow, with Van Damme and Lundgren returning for most of the other films, all of which were met with the global consensus of, yeah, they exist. While I haven't seen it, I can tell just from clips of the movie why it's so beloved. It's a stupid action flick that knows it's stupid, and has fun with its stupidity. A concept that most of the 90s thrived on, and something we still see here and there today. It's definitely going on my watch list, and maybe I'll join the legion of fans that found inspiration in this early 90s cheese flick. Most likely including the people behind today's Asylum feature, Universal Soldiers. Yeah, I've brought this up before, but here, more than ever, I'm amazed they got away with this name. It's not like it's a title of something that's in the public domain, or even where they changed one word and held their breath the real thing wouldn't take them to court. This is literally just taking the original movie title and making it plural. Which, okay, that franchise isn't one of the biggest names, but the rights holders will probably still take umbrage. It's like if the Asylum made a movie called The Highlanders, or The Matrixes, or The Terminators. Of course they named a movie that. Wow, how did it take until Battleship for them to finally get in trouble? But does the movie have anything going for it, besides an arguably infringing name? Well, let's power it on and see if this movie is harder to work with than Van Damme himself. In a secret government research facility, a super soldier project has gone haywire, releasing the extremely dangerous subjects who, thanks to a glitch in their programming, see any and all life as a hostile force that must be exterminated. A small group of survivors managed to flee the compound, but are now stuck out in the open with nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Their only hope is to make it to a bunker that contains a kill switch that will shut down the genetically enhanced one-man armies. But, as they're picked off one by one, their chances of survival become slimmer by the second. Will this ragtag bunch manage to get off this remote island prison? Is this still a better, most dangerous game-esque movie than Predators? Remember how I said Invasion of the Pod People felt like someone's first movie? Well, that's the exact same feeling I get for this one. Seriously, just look at it. Without me saying a word, you can already see that from the camera to the acting to the costumes and props to even how most of it looks like it was filmed in someone's backyard, this looks just barely one step above someone grabbing a video camera and making a movie with some friends over the weekend. Though unlike Pod People, this movie has an excuse to look this way, because for many of the people both on and off the camera, this was their first movie, including familiar name Griff First, who, after concluding a long acting career with the Asylum, returns to begin his directing career. That includes a couple projects with the studio. It's a career he has to this day, and I couldn't be happier for him. But I still miss this guy.
Hey, you homeless piece of shit. Look, I'm real sorry about your house, all right? But I own this place now. So why don't you find a new place to live in? While you're at it, why don't you find a job?
Cinematography, meanwhile, was handled by Alexander Yellen, in his third role as director of photography, and his first with the Asylum, and far from his last, as he'd worked with them on a good number of projects over the next decade, including the bulk of their Z Nation TV show, and even filling in as director for a couple things. And despite the many issues I'll get into with how this movie is shot, I do recognize talent behind the camera, and I see why the studio kept him around for quite a few movies. At least I hope they kept him around because he's good at his job. And making his screenwriting debut with this movie is Jeff Mead, someone I've only just learned about, as you also probably have, and I'm already in love with this guy. He's an actor slash stuntman with one of the most eclectic filmographies I've ever seen. From big-budget, high-octane movies, to smaller action films, to soap operas, to sitcoms, to asylum films, to even FMV video games and VCR board games, this guy has featured in practically every form of visual media you could think of. No credit for LA Noire that I can see, but he was Cowboy in Saints Row, so that's cool. And in addition to his nearly 4 decades of acting and stunt work, he's also an accomplished writer and director, including quite a few independent stage productions and a good chunk of the Asylum's library, most involving cowboys or the armed forces. Just scrolling through his IMDb page, he's a guy who oozes with talent, and I cannot begin to express how much mad respect I have for him. Especially after a 2012 incident where he was trampled by a horse, suffering multiple broken bones and other internal injuries that required years of surgery and recovery. And he's, well, back in the saddle again, getting his black belt in multiple martial arts disciplines and continuing his writing, directing, acting, stunt work to this day. This is one of the coolest guys I have ever heard of, and he seems to be a pretty good guy in real life, and I cannot wait to see more of his work, especially when he appears in front of the camera. This is a guy who has clearly written the book on acting. By which I mean he literally wrote a book called Being a Working Actor. Something to add to the reading list. So yeah, this movie has some talent behind it. From industry veterans to longtime Asylum regulars to people who have become pretty prominent names in the industry, they are not strangers to the concept of movie production. So what does that mean for this movie, their first Asylum project, and a change up from their regular repertoire? Well, nobody's first time is perfect. Even Griff first. Alright, I already made that joke. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. The movie starts on what is clearly one of the Firefly sets the Asylum had rented for the Transmorphers reshoots. Originally, when I was writing this script, I said that the movie was obviously written because, well, they wanted to get the most out of the sets they had built or rented for that movie, since it was clearly the most expensive and detailed scenery used in an Asylum movie up to that point. And considering their blatant reuse of effect shots for their previous movie, you can see why I'd think that. So I based a lot of the script around the assumption that the movie was intended to primarily take place on the sets, but due to time issues, the script arrived too late for the filmmakers to utilize them while they were still being rented by the studio, and consequentially, the movie had to be hastily rewritten to take place mostly outside. And I was completely wrong. According to the commentary, Griff first states that the movie was always intended to take place outside, on a large span of land that he owned, and that most of the shots and dialogue were improvised. Yes, they had a bare-bones Predator-style script to start with, but scenes were usually thought up overnight or even made up on the spot. Any shots utilizing existing set work were just because it was available during the 11-day shoot, and Griff thought it would look cool. And after learning this, I had to go back and rewrite large sections of this script, and most jokes I had planned, including one where I joked this movie doesn't have a first act because they only had 20 minutes left to use the sets, are now null and void. I really put the ass in assumption, don't I? But if they did have to quickly rewrite their script since they couldn't use the sets they wanted, that might have been more of an excuse as to why most of this movie is so boring. Griff said that most of the movie was improvised, and it definitely feels like a night at improv. Bad improv. Like the troupe was given one suggestion from the audience, and that's all they roll with for over 40 minutes. I guess I can at least say that this movie has characters I can tell apart. Not enough to bother to learn all their names, but I at least noticed that they're different people, something I couldn't say for the last 2 movies. There's Major Clifton, a senior officer trying to keep the squad from killing each other, Joe Ellison, a special agent sent to oversee the project, who has his own particular set of skills, Dr. D'Amico, a scientist currently shell-shocked that his creation is trying to kill them, Professor Mueller, a drunk scientist who's completely given up on everything and is just waiting for death, which soon finds him, Private Riley, who's trying to calm down the scientists, and who forms relationships with several of her squad mates, Anne, a scientist who freaks out at the drop of a hat, constantly screaming that they're dead, and giving me horrible Private Perez flashbacks, though at least this character is a non-combative scientist and not somebody supposedly trained to handle these situations, and the rest is just there to get killed, so I mostly ignored them. All except for Lieutenant Clark, whom I hate to hell and back. Most of his screen time, he's mouthing off or mocking anyone with an idea, or straight up threatening the rest of the team, very nearly blowing off several heads just because he wants to. He's also the one who swears the most, and since this actor is doing the exact same thing he did in The Apocalypse, where he's growling out his lines through his teeth, His rants are the biggest chore to sit through.
Why has God forsaken me?
Not that anyone else is more engaging to listen to. Give the filmmakers credit, they did want to flesh out this world and the titular Universal Soldiers. So they do give a detailed backstory about the soldiers, their abilities, and why they pose such a threat. At least, I think they do. As is typical with 95% of all Asylum movies I've sat through so far, the dialogue is delivered so dryly and so relentlessly that, after only a couple scenes, all speaking just devolves into white noise. I've watched this multiple times, and if you asked me to repeat a single line or detail they give about the cyborgs supposedly hunting them down, that's a request I could never fulfill. All I can process is that there are people standing around and talking. Yeah, they're standing around in the open, completely letting their guard down while they're being hunted by cyborgs dedicated to the extermination of all life. Yet somehow they're not wiped out as quickly as you'd expect. Or like, oh sure, every so often we'll get a quick shot of someone being X'd off, but that's nowhere near as important as them reiterating the exact same point for the 50th time. And that's basically the first half of the movie. People stand around, whining and explaining what they should already know. One of them gets killed, they run somewhere else, lather, rinse, repeat. It's the shapeshifter formula again. Except, while the people in Shapeshifter at least tried to get to safety before they started screaming in each other's faces all over again, these brain trusts don't even have that sense of self-preservation. As soon as one of them is killed, they run maybe 100 yards away, point their guns in random directions, then just stop dead in their tracks and start whining again. They make no attempt to hide themselves or find any kind of shelter. They just bring the convoy to a halt, lower their weapons, and stand around screaming at each other, completely forgetting that one of their number was just murdered right in front of them. And somehow being surprised when shouting at the top of their lungs gets another one of their party killed. I'd make a sitting ducks joke, but I don't have to, because at one point, they literally sit down, right in the middle of the road, in broad daylight, and have a smoke break.
Oh, come on!
And I'm just sitting here screaming, hello! Isn't there some genetically enhanced super soldier with expert tracking and weapon skills chasing you? Shouldn't you be running from the thing that has effortlessly wiped out nearly every single person on the island, and is the reason why you're now about 5 heads short since you escaped from the bunker? Apparently not, since they soon abandon even the wooded area that gave them the slightest sense of cover and run right into an open field, where a couple more are killed off. These dumbasses have shorter memory spans than your typical guard in Elder Scrolls.
What luck. You're trespassing. I'm a guard, and I love my job. Excuse me, I'm on duty.
This whole sequence would be hilarious to watch if it wasn't so infuriating to sit through. Like I said, the first half of the movie devolves into long scenes of exposition about stuff they clearly wanted to show, but didn't have the time, budget, or resources to actually show it. Scenes that would already be boring at best, but every time someone delivers their lines, it's in the most aggressive, pedantic, unlikable tone they can muster. Basically every exchange is, this is what happened, I'm blaming you for what happened, or I have an idea, well your idea is garbage, shut up, or here are my orders, yeah screw your orders, I don't care if you're my commanding officer, I'm gonna do what I want. Every time someone says what they need to do, someone else follows it up with some insult or mocking retort. It's another piece of media that horribly misunderstands the training and discipline required by the armed forces, and think that they just hand any unstable nutball that walks into recruitment a gun and let them run wild. They think they're tough and badass, when they're actually some of the most childish, cowardly, closed-minded idiots I've ever had to watch. Like a platoon of Private Perez's from Super Croc. And they get unbearable very, very quickly. So I'm not gonna lie, the first time watching this movie, I just wanted to give up. Before the movie was halfway through, I was ready to write it off as Invasion of the Pod People 2.0. Meandering scenes full of pointless dialogue delivered by worthless characters I had absolutely no investment in, with no plot in sight, and once again some of the worst audio quality I've ever heard in a movie. Sure, there was the occasional kill shot that kept things moving, but with how insufferable these characters were, and how long, drawn out, and ultimately pointless these exposition dumps ended up being, I was just about ready to call this one of the worst Asylum movies I had ever seen. And if I didn't have to watch for my job, I would have turned it off before the 30-minute mark. If even that. But then, around the halfway point, the movie suddenly starts to pick up. And I mean suddenly. After the 6th or 7th kill shot and the team being whittled down to only a handful of survivors, everybody abruptly shuts up and actually decides to do something about these unstoppable killer cyborgs. There's no transition, nothing that makes this kill shot any different than the other team members who were unceremoniously butchered right in front of everyone. Just that everybody suddenly remembers, oh yeah, there was a kill switch to turn these things off, wasn't there? And they start running towards the mainframe central building. And from here on out, the rest of the movie becomes much more action-packed. A lot less sitting around, discussing how everyone is boned, with the occasional firing of guns in random directions, and a lot more running, dodging, stealthily avoiding the enemy, and even hand-to-hand combat. Oh my god, where was this movie? Why did we have to wait almost 40 minutes before the movie decided, hey, you know what? I'm tired of sitting around with my thumb up my nose. I want to be a movie now. I guess the filmmakers finally figured out some action sequences for this action movie, so now they could stop shooting filler of everyone basically saying the same things over and over again, and actually have somebody somewhere do something. It's a theory I pulled straight out of thin air, but whatever the case, from here on out, the movie gets a lot more fun. In fact, that's the best word to describe the second half of the movie. Fun. It feels like the filmmakers had a lot of love for cheesy action sci-fi movies, and this was their tribute to them. Not through directly copying any famous scene, at least not that I could tell, but by giving their own take on the kinds of stunts and shots a movie like this would feature. You want to see someone shoot a boulder to block a passageway he barely manages to duck into? Boom, you got it. You want to see two of the survivors on opposite sides of a tree, each thinking the other is the enemy and accidentally attacking each other? Boom, you got it. You want to see a universal soldier stabbing through the ceiling on one of our heroes? Boom, you got it. You want to see Riley finally deciding she's had enough and going toe-to-toe with one of the machine men? Hey, never fear, that scene is here. All the fun that could be had with the concept of soldiers versus cyborg warriors, that can be reasonably expected within the tight time and budget restrictions, is exemplified in the movie's remaining runtime. It's like Scarecrow, only somehow even cheaper. Case in point, this rolling down a hill sequence, straight out of the Adam West Batman show. Or did trees decide they now grow sideways? Heck, the other elements in general just become more fun. The writing in particular gets, well, not better, but goofier. And I mean that in the best possible way. Now that they're finally done with their endless exposition dumps, the characters switch from their constant whining and explaining, and start delivering lines that, again, the filmmakers thought would fit in a low-budget action movie. And let's just say I had a hard time picking the out-of-context opening teaser for this video. And when they do have more exposition to deliver, hey, look at that! They finally developed enough brain cells to allow them to walk and talk at the same time. It also helps that the characters delivering this dialogue suddenly become people I actually want to listen to. Besides getting fewer instances of the actors blowing out the mic, the characters are magically more interesting. Special Agent Joe Ellison, whose biggest contribution so far has been putting a badly injured soldier out of his misery, then getting crap for it in nearly every stop, is suddenly going mano-a-mano against the cyborgs, breaking out the martial arts, and channeling his inner Bruce Willis as he stealthily sneaks around the vents of the building housing the mainframe. And the two surviving women are separated from the others, giving Private Riley a chance to finally become a main character, with her own showdown against the Universal Soldier. And when Anne tries to start up the whole "there's no way this is going to work, we're all dead" spiel again, Riley gets right in her face and tells her to grow some. That standing around whining about everything isn't going to fix a damn thing, and the only way they're going to survive is if they keep moving. Thank you! Again! Where was this 40 minutes ago? Oh, and Anne's evil, by the way. Yeah, she holds Riley at gunpoint and says that she can't let them shut down her life's work, and this was all supposed to happen. I don't know if she activated the soldiers and this was her idea of a field test, or if she's gone completely cuckoo and developed some kind of Stockholm syndrome for the haywire warriors, but she's dead in the same minute, so I guess it doesn't matter. And Lieutenant Clark, the guy I said I couldn't stand in the least, even he reveals that he actually cares about his brothers in arms. That, even though he could find a way to get off the island and abandon this risky quest to shut down the system, he's not going anywhere until his team is safe. When a Universal Soldier attacks his group, he takes control of the situation, pushing them down and out of sight, and, while Joe is duking it out with the cyborg, making sure the other soldier escapes safely. And when that soldier is mortally wounded and can't go on, he's there to hand him a cigarette and calm him down, before sadly having to move on to avoid the same fate. That soldier unfortunately has to shoot himself, and Clark, hearing the shot in the distance, gives an enraged roar, showing just how dedicated to his squad this guy was, and how much he wanted to see them get out safely and not end up as casualties in an unwinnable war. Now, you could argue that, considering what we've already seen, this is all out of character for him. Especially since he ran and hid in a silo when the rest of this group was attacked by one of the cyborgs. But I didn't like his character, and I'm glad he grew a new one. And his final few scenes do redeem him in my eyes, turning a guy I originally couldn't wait to see dead, or at the very least close his mouth and never open it again, into one of the most compassionate, likable people in the movie. And someone I really felt bad for when he was finally taken down by a Universal soldier. Speaking of which, I haven't really talked about who's supposed to be the main baddies of the movie, have I? Well, there's not much to say. They're absent for over half the movie, and when they do appear, it's mostly just in quick cuts or blurry background appearances. I don't even think they kill anyone directly. Most kill shots are from long stakes being fired from off screen, which I guess we're supposed to believe are being made and thrown by the killer cyborgs. And yes, they do explain why the soldiers don't just grab a gun and mow the entire squad down, because their programming wasn't completed and they're basically stuck in stealth mode. So they use sharp sticks, that I guess they're somehow perfectly lathing themselves in between ambushes. Except for 2 kills, where they use what I'm assuming are built-in grappling hooks, that they don't use for every kill because... Now the movie does hype these guys to hell and back. They're unstoppable killing machines, they have advanced healing abilities, they can instantly cloak themselves, they've spontaneously developed visual communication abilities with each other. I think they can even fly. They really want us to see these as a legitimate threat, even though very little of what we're told actually comes into play. And while I think they're trying to set up each of the cyborgs as a different class type with differing abilities, each one has the exact same fighting style and weaknesses, and when we do finally get to see them up close, most of them look the exact same. Because, you know, they're all played by the same actor. And 4 unstoppable killing machines, genetically enhanced to be superior to the human being in every way, 2 of them are literally taken out in hand-to-hand combat. Yeah, whoever funded this project is going to have more buyer's remorse than anyone who's pre-ordered a Ubisoft game. Oh, but they get their own swoosh sound whenever they're on screen, which is abused more than the chong sound from Mr. Gray from Dreamcatcher. Still, at the end of the day, this is a perfectly serviceable antagonist. They're a legitimate menace, utilizing sharp weapons with horrifying accuracy, and they're programmed for hit-and-run missions, so there's a good reason why we don't see them for most of the movie. And yes, they're overhyped, but so are the monsters and super soldiers from other movies of this type, where they're seemingly unstoppable killing machines, until they're suddenly not. And while I was going to joke about the costume and makeup, it's actually very professionally done prosthetic work for a movie of this caliber. I was going to say it looks like someone's homemade Borg costume, but if it is, can I commission one? I'll totally rock the next Comic-Con. So while they're not the most intimidating or interesting bad guys I've seen, they're not annoyingly overpowered like The Legend of Bloody Jack, or reliant on the main characters being complete morons like Hitchhiker. And for a movie paying tribute to steroid-enhanced stupid sci-fi action flicks, they're a perfect salute to those films, even if they come across as less Predator and more Robo-War. Also, they climb up trees like this, so what's not to love? Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. Actually, the effects in general, both practical and digital, are pretty damn good for this movie. Almost insultingly so. It's another tiny Juggernaut project, who have already established themselves as the best effects studio the Asylum has worked with up to this point. And since Griff first was friends with visual effects supervisor Scott Wheeler, and this was obviously a low-risk, more under-the-radar project for the studio, Scott saw this movie as a good opportunity to experiment and hone their craft. And the result is some of their best work I've seen so far. I've already praised the regular makeup for the Universal soldiers, but they go the extra mile and include deterioration for these cyborgs. So when they're being violently beaten, we see them getting bloodier and even parts of their circuitry being torn off. Especially with this soldier, who actually ripped off his facial machinery to avoid being killed by the kill switch. And it's not just the cyborgs getting a rough treatment, as the human side also gets an impressive makeup job to emphasize the deep cuts and mortal wounds each of them suffer during their fight for survival. I already mentioned a cyborg climbing a tree, but at one point they also have one fly through the air, which, according to Griff First, almost resulted in the actor getting killed, and is probably why the shot is so quick and awkwardly cut off. And while the practical effects do a decent job of making it look like someone's been impaled, this may be the first time I can say the digital effects look more convincing. When someone gets a stake or a grappling hook through the chest, it really looks like it happened. It's so sudden and brutal, and the compositing and lighting is so well done, it almost looks solid. The movie legitimately fooled me a couple times, and that's not easy to do. I also like this digital overlay that's supposed to make it look like we're seeing things from the cyborg's perspective. Despite many of the shots clearly not being POV, but they include this ambitious shutdown corruption effect for one of them, so it all evens out. And if it wasn't already impressive, the effects work gets really ambitious in the last 10 minutes. But I guess we'll get back to that. The teams really put their heart and soul into their physical and digital imagery. All for a movie that looks shot in someone's backyard, with the pocket change they found under their couch cushion, utilizing one of the shakiest cameras I've ever had to stomach. Yeah, I guess I had to get to it eventually. The camera is, well, the best, worst camera I think we've seen yet. Or the worst, best, take your pick. Griff states in the commentary that because they were shooting outside and improvising most of their scenes, they couldn't set up reliable camera stands or cranes, and the only mobile camera they could procure that would give them film quality footage was a 65-pound behemoth. Yeah, keep in mind, this was before everyone was recording videos on their 4K smartphone cameras, so mad respect towards the camera operators that had to lug around and even run with that box on their shoulders. And this is probably the best looking footage they could capture given the circumstances. That said, it's still the shakiest camera we've seen since the 9/11 Commission report. Yeah, I know that's always my go-to movie when I'm complaining about camera stability, but don't worry, now I have two go-to movies. The camera never stops moving. Every single second, it is shaking. And if it's already violently shaking when the characters are moving around, then any and all visuals become incomprehensible when they're running or fighting. Or even when groups are just standing around, arguing. And because half the movie was made up on the spot, I can only imagine how difficult it was for the operator to keep up with the actors' improvised actions. Heck, I'm amazed the digital artist could keep the effects lined up with the footage, it is so shaky. Not helped by the miserable editing, which Griff First unfortunately also claims credit for. But that said, I can still tell that the camera operators knew what they were doing. Even as Alexander Yellin is balancing that behemoth of a box on his shoulders, he still proves that he knows the art of dynamic film technique. We get high shots, we get low shots, we get close shots, we get shots from a distance, we get shots that rapidly switch between actors, shots that circle the actors, moving shots that track everyone in the shot, shots that slowly approach a target with the actors. Obviously, they didn't let the cumbersome, outdated technology they had to work with hold them back. And this being a mid-2000s movie, we get a couple of those fast motion zoom effects, which I could be annoyed by, but I'm just impressed they had the know-how to pull them off. Okay, most of the footage is shot so close to the actors, Mark Atkins would be telling the camera to back off, and the editing is so choppy, many shots don't even last a second, but I can't say enough for the ambition and creativity clearly on display. It really does make me excited to see more of Alexander Yellin's camera work, especially when he gets to work with more complicated camera setups. Who knows, maybe Cleaver Family Reunion will be easier to sit through knowing he's behind the lens. So the movie ends with, oh crap, I didn't even talk about who's in this movie. Yeah, sadly not much to go over for this cast list. We have familiar faces Christian Quintrall, Jason S. Gray, Noel Thurman, and Justin Jones appearing in various roles. And while he's not credited in the movie or IMDb, Griff First confirms in the commentary he's the off-camera officer at the end. And with Christian and Noel's departure following this movie, this concludes the mass exodus from the asylum we've been seeing for the last several films, and the final appearances of many who made up most of the studio's early work. Justin Jones has one more acting role in an asylum movie before his work becomes almost strictly off-screen, which is sad since with the departure of Lee Scott, I was really hoping he'd take his place as the guy who dies and everything. while Jason S. Gray becomes probably the longest holdout, appearing in Asylum movies all the way to 2009, before semi-retiring from acting and trying his hand as a casting director. And the rest of the cast is mostly comprised of people who have this movie, and maybe another one, as their only Asylum credits, and mostly stuff padding out the rest of their resumes, which will become the norm for most Asylum movies going forward. Dario Deke has been in a couple movies, and he was in Resident Evil 6 as enemies. Rick Malambry seems to be acting to this day, including background voices for Gears of War 4 and 5, and a Goosebumps game I've never heard of. Randy Mulkey seems to be the most prolific actor, with over 50 appearances to his name, including one other Asylum movie and several other sci-fi originals. Cameron Gordon became a recurring Asylum actor, featuring in 3 other Asylum movies and a few episodes of Z Nation. And playing the eponymous Universal Soldiers is stuntman Rin Rains, who would do stunt work for several Asylum movies, with bit parts in a few of them. As always, I congratulate these people for doing their best with what they were given, and I wish them luck with any future endeavors. And if they did badly with what they used to do, I hope they either improved or found something better suiting their talents. And they're not building a slander case against me for making fun of them in this video. Anyway, the movie ends with a giant robot attacking the base. Yeah, all the Universal Soldiers are dead, Riley is the lone survivor, and suddenly a 30-foot tall mechanical construct starts chasing after her. I guess it doesn't come completely out of left field. We do see this thing during the opening credits, as well as some random insert shots here and there, but we're never clued in on what it actually is. It's never discussed, never brought up by anyone, never clarified if it's somehow also part of the Universal Soldiers project, or just something else being worked on this island. Just that, for literally the last 5 minutes, the Iron Giant skeleton decides to join the party. What's even funnier is that the movie technically wraps up right before this sequence. The last Universal Soldier kills Joe, Riley kills the soldier, gets up, walks away, screen fades to black, roll credits right there. But I guess the movie ran 5 minutes too short, so giant robot, why not? Now that said, it's still a damn fun and impressive pointless ending. Once again, showing off Tiny Juggernaut's incredible skill in animation and compositing work. Even if it's not actually there, there's a sense of size and scope to this thing. Not as much as the Asylum's War of the Worlds gave us, but it's still a pretty damn big robot I wouldn't want to be within 300 miles of. Especially if it started chucking telephone poles at me. Okay, the scene consistency and color correction is a joke, with some shots obviously filmed at different times of day than others, and the obvious jet stock footage is almost as blurry as Super Crocs, but that kind of adds to the fun of how homemade and backyard auteur this whole movie has felt. Like a 12-year-old filming in their yard with their friends, one of whom just so happens to know how to use RealSoft 3D. And it ends as goofily as it begins, so what can I really get mad at? After the robot shrugs off a missile barrage, Riley gets in a perfect shot with a handgun, overloading a nearby power plant generator, and, well, as Ed best put it,
Somebody's up top!
Riley returns to the mainland with her friend's dog tags in tow, and the military decides to sweep the whole thing under the rug. So, life sucks, I guess. Yeah, this isn't a good movie. Yeah, shock of the century, I know. It's boring, it's directionless, the audio quality is a joke, the editing really gets on my nerves at times, and the camera shakes more than an overloaded washing machine in the middle of a San Francisco earthquake. Even compared to the Asylum's usual churn-out, this feels incredibly amateur, like something some friends just slapped together over the weekend, then uploaded to YouTube, where it achieved a lifetime view count of 158. Except I had to pay money to see this. But, credit where credit is due, they tried. I can tell the people behind this actually wanted to make this movie, and pay tribute to the over-the-top action and sci-fi movies they were clearly inspired by. And in that sense, they succeeded. There are a lot of fun sequences, a lot of crazy stunts, a lot of goofy dialogue, and a lot of send-ups to these ridiculous action fantasy flicks that care more about entertaining than making sense. And the animation and effects work is better than it has any right to be. Does that redeem this movie? Not really. You still have to endure the insufferable first half of the film, and even afterwards, you really have to dig and lower your expectations to find the good parts. The most praise the movie deserves is on the same level as parents watching their third grader in a school play. You're happy they're happy, and they're probably putting all they can into being on that stage, but you also wish you could fast forward to when they're professionally acting on Broadway with better talent and higher production values more worth your time and money. At the end of the day, I can't find much reason to recommend this movie. But at the same time, I can tell that there was valiant effort and ambition behind making it, which, after the absolute black hole of apathy that was the previous feature, I welcome with open arms. I do think the people behind this film have potential, and I eagerly await when I get to feature their later work on this channel. The movie may be universally panned, but I'm glad the makers are soldiering on. Alright, I think we're done with this round of filler movies between ambitious asylum projects. So, hopefully that means we're back to at least moderately budgeted movies with their next release. Does that equate to something good, or at least entertaining? I guess we'll find out with their next Mockbuster. That may or may not actually be a Mockbuster. Hey there, you reached the end of the video. The names scrolling are the awesome people who are keeping the channel going. And I'd like to give a special shout out to Sukaretta. Thanks for your support. If you'd also like to see your name here, please consider heading over to my Patreon, where you can choose a tier and reap the rewards within. And while you're here, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It's how these videos get noticed, and what encourages me to continue making them. Whatever you decide, stay awesome, keep watching, and I'll see you next time.